of you did the teaser video. I told you to read a whole book in the Bible to this time, didn't I? Granted, it's only a one-chapter book, but I kind of want to share how I got on this message. I tell you guys that, messages come to me in all kinds of different ways, and usually it's when I'm out running, and if you ever exercise, your mind gets totally clear when you've exercised, and I always find that as a way for God to speak to me, but that was not how I got this message. At my previous church and here, I always made it a point to go to the borough meetings. And usually at the borough meetings, you get to hear what the borough or the community's making decisions on. You also get to see if there's any touchy subjects that you might want to see if you can help or anything like that. Then at the end, they always have a chance for people in the community to speak or to share. And it's always interesting what people feel that they want to share about. And being at these borough meetings, I get to hear individuals who, let's just say, I wouldn't want them living next to me. As they go about calling the police and complaining to the borough about people who have cars with expired inspection stickers on their property, calling about a sidewalk a little chewed up, or maybe their bushes or grass is a little high, or a wall starting to crumble a little bit. And every month, the same people are making the same complaints, and they are making the same calls to the police. I called the police 5 times this month about this and about that, and they're explaining, you can have an expired inspection sticker on your car if your car is parked on your property. As long as it's not on the street, it's when it's on the street that it's become illegal. So if you're working on a car and you've been working on one for a while, you may not have gotten it inspected because it probably doesn't run yet. But so again, hearing all this, then as I don't know if you've seen these signs, but as I drive in to Pembroke, and I like to look around, why focus on the road when there's other things you can be looking at? And I saw a sign that says, "My neighbor is a Karen." And it's a duplex. I'm like, I bet you they don't get along very well. Right? So as I'm thinking about these different things, that led me to this message today. So what is your relationship like with your neighbors? Does everyone get along well and they spend time together? Do their neighborhood barbecues or any of those things? Are you and your neighbor are more people who are just kind of wave in passing? A very casual relationship. I'll be honest, that's kind of where we are in our neighborhood. We are kind of part of the new wave in our neighborhood. Our community's probably 30-some years old, and a lot of the people have been there since the beginning, but now some of them are passing away and new families are moved in. So like all my neighbors know each other very well, but I'm kind of the new person. I'm the guy who runs all the time, and they just kind of think I'm weird, which is good. I keep them at arm's length. But no, I wave and I chat as we see each other, but it's not like I go around knocking on doors delivering cookies or anything. But so it's kind of very casual. We talk when we see each other. Or are you and your neighbors at odds with each other? Now, are most of the conversations about complaining about one thing or another? Grass is too high, too many cars, people coming in and out all hours of the night. That's one person really comes to the borough and complains about stuff because he gets up really early for work. And I'm like, well, maybe some of those people work night shift and they're leaving to go to work at night. How many of you ever work rotating shifts? I worked 11 to 7. Guess what? You're leaving at 10:30 and you're getting in real late. Or if you work swing shift, you're getting home at 11:30. So if you really don't know your neighbor, you could be complaining about something. It's just somebody going back and forth to work. Now, depending on your relationship with your neighbor probably determines how much you care about them or you look out for them. A good neighbor probably keeps an eye out for the neighbor when they are away, and so nobody does anything to their house. I think I mentioned that a couple weeks ago. A bad neighbor keeps an eye on their neighbor's property, just looking for reasons to pick up a fight or an argument or call police on them. Does anything I mentioned today sound like your relationship with your neighbors where you live? We're going to look at a passage today, but we are going to cover the whole book in the Bible because it's about neighbors and what happens. The book is Obadiah. It's only one chapter long, and we're going to read Obadiah chapter 1, verses 17 through 18, which is kind of near the end. So Obadiah 1, 17 through 18. But on Mount Zion will be deliverance. It will be holy, and Jacob will possess his inheritance. Jacob will be a fire and Joseph a flame. Esau will be stubble, and they will set him on fire and destroy him. There will be no survivors from Esau. The Lord has spoken. Now, these two verses are near the end of the chapter. It's basically saying that Mount Zion will be delivered and Esau will be turned to stubble. But just looking at the end and looking at these two verses, if you don't know the story, it could be very confusing. And you won't know what led up to the result unless you've kind of read the whole chapter. Now, not a whole lot is known about the prophet Obadiah. The book is written after Israel is divided between the northern and southern kingdoms. The northern kingdom was known as Israel, and the southern kingdom was known as Judah. Now, Judah and Edom were neighboring countries, and they were actually relatives. And the Edomites were also known as the house of Esau. Edom was not a very good neighbor to Judah. They constantly harassed the Jews in Judah. They basically caused a lot of trouble. They often participated in attacks against Judah on a regular basis. They also would turn their backs on Judah when Judah was being attacked by other countries or nations. Again, they were relatives. So here you just think of, having a relative being attacked by another nation and you turn your back on them. How many of you had brothers or sisters that loved to pick on you? But they wouldn't let anybody else pick on you. Right? I actually had a roommate like that in the military. Big guy. He was about 6'4". He loved to mess with me, but he wouldn't let anybody else in the barracks mess with me at all. So it was interesting. So the idea of a brother looking out for somebody else. Yeah, I'll mess with you, but nobody else can. But here, Edom was not even looking out for their brothers as they were being attacked by other nations. Now, Edom was also a country that was really proud of themselves and what they were able to accomplish. Now, they were a very wealthy nation. They had trade routes that went through, and they also had very lucrative items in which they could trade, so they were able to make lots of money of the traders who were passing through. If you have something good that people want, you can trade and you can get very wealthy if you have the whole supply and demand economics. If you have what people want, you can get very wealthy. And that's what happened here with Edom. They had the trade routes, they had things that people wanted, and they were able to become very wealthy. They also thought that their capital and that their nation was indestructible. They thought they could resist any invasion. So they built their cities into the mountain clefts, and the pathways were so narrow that any opposing army or opposing force would be sitting ducks trying to invade because they'd be trying to get through these narrow passages, and they would be basically a bottleneck and be like shooting ducks in a barrel. Now, you probably have seen, fish in a barrel. Ducks would fly. Let's go with fish in a barrel. You've probably seen pictures of their famed capital city because it is a major tourist attraction. It's one of the marvels of the ancient world. We call it Petra. But notice I said it's a tourist attraction. So I guess it wasn't invincible after all. And it's not like it was the failure of Petra was a result of modern advancements and because of those modern advancements, the city became irrelevant. That's not what happened. Now, if we remember, Petra and Edom was destroyed way before modern technology came along. And we remember that Edom was prideful. They often attacked their neighbors in Judah. They turned their backs on when other nations attacked Judah. Basically, they were turning their backs on their brothers while assuming that they were safe in their indestructible nation and capital. Judah, the southern kingdom, was part of God's people. Edom was attacking, ignoring, and celebrating the troubles of God's people. Now, other nations took some joy in the struggles and misfortunes of Judah, but Edom was by far the worst in celebrating the failures or the catastrophes that would go across Judah. Edom's hatred of God's people and their self-righteous pride was more than God could take. In 164 BC, Judas Maccabeus routed the Edomites, and the nation no longer existed in the first century. Now, when we think of the warnings, God actually showed leniency to every other nation around Judah, but Edom. That's how horrible Edom was to their brothers, to their neighbors. So much so that God allowed Judas Maccabeus to rout the Edomites, and the nation no longer existed by the first century, completely annihilated. And that's what these verses that we read today was talking about when it said the house of Esau will be a stubble, while God's people will see deliverance. God's people still exist today. When we talk about the Jews, we talk about the nation of Israel. Of course, God's message also reached the Gentiles. So God's family has grown as Christianity has grown, and we too are known as God's people. But the book of Obadiah is a reminder that no matter how much persecution that God's people will face, that those who attack God's people will eventually be destroyed, and that his people will continue on for all eternity. We have that same expectation as followers of Jesus. We know that we too will face attacks and persecution, but that we have the promise of eternity with the Father to look forward to. Edom constantly attacked and harassed the nation of Judah, and God allowed them to be wiped out. What is our behavior saying about us? So getting back to thinking about you and your neighbors, who is doing the harassing? If we are being bad neighbors, what does that have to say about our walk with the Lord? Now, you may be looking for a loophole for your behavior and thinking that your neighbor is definitely not one of God's people. Right? Like, Pastor Mark, you just don't know. They're horrible. I'm not being bad to God's people. But didn't God send his son to die for everyone so that may have a chance to come to know Jesus? Don't write off your neighbor just yet, because God still might have plans for them. And maybe those plans include you introducing them to Jesus. We won't be able to do that if we're always at odds with our neighbors. I know that some of you, again, will say, I don't know your neighbor. And you would be right. I barely know mine. So I definitely don't know yours. But maybe you need to take this to God in prayer, because I'm pretty sure that he knows who your neighbor is. And maybe he knows what they need to hear and what's going on. So what do you think about when you think of the story of Edom and how they enjoyed the trials of their neighbor Judah and everything that Judah had to endure? What did you think of the pride of Edom, that they relied on their wealth, their strength, and their impenetrable city? What lesson do you take from this story? Now, I focused a lot on the fact that these two nations were neighbors, but I could just as easily focus on the arrogance and the pride that Edom had in relying on their wealth and their well-built city. We also need to realize that God will always look out for his people and punish those who go against them. We may face trial and tribulation on this earth, but God's promise is eternal and everlasting, and he is always faithful. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, as we looked at the book of Obadiah, and we really just hear a story of nations, two nations that were actually related to each other.